I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you. Well, good morning. Well, good morning. Well, good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our August Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. We live in interesting times. I could mention today what is going on in my Episcopal church, but I will pass over it with the comment that my wife sweetly asked me this morning if I were ready now to become a Baptist. But actually what I want to talk with you about is an article relating to the recall in California, the recall vote coming up. As you know, the Democrat strategy was to not have any serious Democrats to enter the race. This has taken on national proportions. Perhaps not, it is no surprise that the Washington Times this morning reports that the AFL-CIO leaders yesterday voted in Chicago to oppose the recall and urge Democrats not to run in the October 7th recall election. However, opportunism runs deep, and Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez is reported also in the Times as saying she would consider running if Mrs. Feinstein could not be persuaded to jump in. Quote, "If nobody goes in, I may have to," Mrs. Sanchez said. Well, it's a lovely day, a lot of sunshine out there, and we are certainly this summer enjoying global warming. It's the coolest summer I can remember in the Washington, D.C. area. To date, in 2003, the Leadership Institute has trained 2,268 students in 88 schools. That compares to 3,142 in all of last year. We have placed 32 job seekers through our employment placement service to date this year. And you have before you at your tables our 2003 school schedule. I ask that you take a moment to review the calendar and consider attending one of our remaining programs in 2003 and consider recommending these schools to others. As always, I thank our donors for their contributions to the Leadership Institute. Without your generosity, our institute would not continue to grow and train the number of students that we do train and be as successful as we are. We trained more people in the first half of this year than in any previous 6 months in the history of the Institute. Thank you for your dedication and support of the Leadership Institute. Now to introduce Jessica Dorian. Jessica will lead us in an invocation and pledge of allegiance. Jessica is an intern in the Center for Print and Broadcast Media Department here at the Leadership Institute. She's from Hendersonville, North Carolina, and graduated in May of this year from Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, with a BA in Communication Arts. She will leave shortly to be attending Regent University in Virginia Beach to pursue a master's in journalism. She plans to use journalism to launch a writing career. And by the way, I just last night finished reading Treason by Ann Coulter. I called her and left a voicemail on her phone message and said to her that, Ann, you should be ashamed of yourself writing a book that was obviously so much fun to write. I commend the book. Jessica Dorian hopes one day to be an author on current issues and to have an impact on public policy. Jessica, for the invocation and pledge.
Good morning. Will you guys join me in prayer? Dear Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day. Lord, thank you that we can come and fellowship around the table of ideas, true ideas. And I pray for a blessing on our speaker today, Lord, that you would just give her clarity and help us all glean from her wisdom that she has to share with us this morning. Thank you. And bless this time together. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now for an update on the campus leadership program by Scott Stewart. Scott is our new director of the campus leadership program here at the Leadership Institute. Scott was elected chairman of the College Republican National Committee in July of 1999 with almost 75% of the delegate votes, and 2 years later he was unanimously reelected. He led an organization which greatly exceeded the success of all previous administrations of the College Republican National Committee, led them to having a greater number of clubs than was ever before members, and probably, although the records aren't as clear, a greater number of members. And these are in all 50 states, and the people he organized have played a vital role as foot soldiers for the Republican Party. In my judgment, and it is an informed judgment, Scott's the best chairman that the College Republicans have ever had. He's a 1998 graduate of Yale University with a BA in history. Scott began his involvement with College Republicans as a club chairman at Brigham Young University in Utah, which became the largest club in the country. After transferring to Yale, Scott refounded the Yale College Republicans and became a two-term state chairman of the Connecticut Union of College Republicans. During his tenure as state chairman of Connecticut, Scott doubled the size of the federation and established his record as one of the nation's leaders in training, educating, and activating College Republicans. Scott is a native of San Jose, California, and currently resides in D.C. Scott?
Thank you, Morton. I don't know if I quite expected that. I think Morton is the best mentor that I could have ever possibly imagined. I remember him telling me in, I think it was probably just before I was elected chairman. I think it was a couple of years beforehand. I was interviewing him for one reason or another. I always like to find a reason to come to Washington to talk to Morton. And he said, well, it's a very simple process. You know, the National Office for the College Republicans should just dump people in vans and have them drive around the country and raise new College Republican chapters. I said, that's a great idea. Why aren't we doing it now? And nobody knew why. And so that was why we had the success in tripling the number of chapters and things like that. But I'm actually not here to talk with you about College Republicans. I'm here to talk with you about the tremendous redesign of the campus leadership program that we have gone through, which is going to revitalize the program and really make a tremendous difference for the movement on university campuses. Particularly, I want to thank Morton again for believing that we have philosophically sound, technologically proficient, and movement-oriented students that are conservatives on university campuses. And if they are not technologically proficient, that we can teach them here at the Leadership Institute to be so. We have currently 256 active campus leadership program organizations. They are college clubs that run conservative programs, bring conservative speakers to university campuses to do real work that actually matters. And I will say that number is going to be dramatically increasing. We are going to send out 4 full-time field representatives for 10 weeks in 4 different regions around the country. One region we're going to have them in is going to be One field representative will represent Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, as well as Vermont and New Hampshire for a short period of time. Another field representative is going to be going to New York, to California, Oregon, and Washington. The third field representative is going to be going to Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And the final field representative that we're going to send out this year is going to be going to Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, as well as Wisconsin. So they are making, those are the states that we are going to touch this year. Those field representatives are going to raise at least, at the minimum, 40 new campus leadership program clubs. A remarkable achievement for just 4 people. They're also going to strengthen 15 existing clubs that we have across the country that bring conservative activism to a university campus. That being said, that's the beginning of the process. We are also going to train more people this year through the Youth Leadership School than we have ever trained before. 688 was the record set back in 2000 or 2001. We will train more students this year than we have ever trained in the Youth Leadership School before. We will also start more student publications this year than we have started at any time in the past. We'll start another 10 to 12 student publications this fall, which will bring us to about 20 new student publications this year. That being said, the way that the program is going to continue to evolve and change is going to really, I think, transform the face of the conservative movement on the university campuses. College Republicans have advanced to a tremendous degree, and I think that it is certainly possible that the campus leadership program can do the same. Over the course of the time, the winter time, those field representatives that we hired from the winter of 2003 and 2004 are going to be preparing 20 youth leadership schools for the springtime, which is roughly double what we did this year. They are also going to be doing meeting with donors, making sure that they're very, very well aware of what they've been accomplishing and how many new groups that they've been starting on university campuses, and preparing all of those groups that they have just started, those clubs that they've just started on campus, to be doing the activism that actually is going to matter and is going to change minds and hearts on campus. And during the 2004 year, we are going to send out another round of field representatives in the springtime who will recruit another 20 or 30 groups. And then the large program goal that is our objective is to send out nearly a dozen full-time field representatives in the fall of 2004 in order to raise as many as 150 to 200 new campus leadership program groups. By the time that we reach January and February of 2005, the campus leadership program should expect 500 campus groups, which is roughly double where we are today. A remarkable achievement that will be due to our field representatives and to all of your support here at Leadership Institute. A couple of our staffers that I'd like to highlight for a moment. Billy Parker is our national field director and will be managing all of the operations of our individual field representatives on the ground. And I have to tell you, this is not an easy task. You have field representatives who are going to be in a different state nearly every single day of the week. I mean, they're going to be a different club, a different university campus every single day of the week, and then they're going to be in a different state every single week of their 10-week tour during the fall, which is a very, very difficult task. Keeping them fed and housed and paid moderately is is a difficult task nonetheless, but he is going to do it, and he is very well prepared. For any of you that are interested, this coming week, the 11th through the 15th, our 4 field representatives will be here at the Leadership Institute accepting the training and preparing their bank accounts and making sure that they are ready to go on their tour. If you have an interest in stopping by during the day, feel free to do so, to meet some of our field representatives. I think it would be a tremendous opportunity that we'll be training them here on the 3rd floor, and you can certainly stop by then. So once again, our objectives are to run more youth leadership schools than we have ever run before. Next year, our intention is 30 youth leadership schools, to train well over the record of students that we have done. I think we'll train at least 800 next year. And then to reach 500 campuses with campus leadership program groups doing good conservative work by the time we reach January and February of 2005. So I certainly hope that that is good news to all of you. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Scott. You're doing good things, and I expect great things from your program. This program has consistently grown from its foundation, but the reorganization was needed in order to give a spurt, and so we could organize a great number of other clubs. I will throw out a challenge there if any of you want to seriously think about it. Obviously, we are limited in the matter of revenue, and the revenue has declined each of the last 3 years, and despite that, we have trained more people the first 6 months of this year. We're learning how to do more with less, and I would love for Scott to have a larger field program, and therefore I asked him to give me what is the marginal cost for putting a single field staffer out in the field as school begins for 10 weeks this fall, which includes the modest salary and travel and whatever other expenses are attendant to it, plus all the information that is distributed on campuses, plus the large packet of information that we provide immediately to new clubs. It comes out to $12,000 per field staffer. And we now have plans, which you heard, for 4 full-time field staffers to start. Frankly, we train enough people that we have a supply of extremely good folks whom we could send out. And so if any of you happens to want to write a check for $12,000 to fund another field staffer for Scott, either Scott or I would be happy to see you about this afterwards. I'll just throw that out. And now to introduce our truly outstanding speaker, who is one of the great ladies of the conservative movement. To introduce her, we have Jessica Beeson. Jessica is finishing her last week as an intern in the programs department, where she helps develop curriculum for schools and coordinates speakers. She was born and raised in Kokomo, Indiana, and will be a sophomore at DePauw University, majoring in economics and political science. At DePauw, she will serve as student body president and recruitment chair of the College Republicans. Jessica is also secretary of the Indiana State College Republicans and a former intern at the Heritage Foundation, where she met our speaker of today, Becky Norton Dunlop. Jessica plans to become a corporate lawyer and get heavily involved in politics. Jessica Beeson.
I had the privilege of meeting Becky Norton Dunlop last summer when I was an intern at the Heritage Foundation, and she came to speak to all of our interns, and she talked to us about some things that I'll never forget. She, first of all, taught us a saying that I would hear many, many times at the Leadership Institute this summer, that was, it's not enough to be right. You have to be able to articulate that you are right. And Becky was the first one that explained that to me and that group of interns. Another thing that she taught us about were principles and leading with principles. And she taught us that no matter what you face or no matter what you go through, you have to stick to your principles. And so after I heard her speak, I was very, very inspired, and she was my hero, and I was kind of nervous because I really wanted a copy of her book. So I sent her an email, and here was I, a lowly 18-year-old intern, hadn't even joined college yet, hadn't even been. And I sent her an email, and I said, could you send me a copy of your book, or could I stop by and get one? And I was leaving that Friday, and Becky was out of the office on business because Heritage keeps her very busy. She's the vice president of external relations, and she's gone all the time. And so I just I didn't know if I'd be able to get one, and I thought, well, hey, at least I learned, and I'll have to order one off Amazon.com or something like that. And so it was okay. And I went home, I went back to Kokomo, settled in with my family, and about 3 days later, the mail comes, and it's from the Heritage Foundation, and there's an autographed book inside from Becky Norton Dunlop. And right there, I just fell in love with Becky, because even though she's so busy and she's worked for Ronald Reagan, she's been off all around the country touring for Heritage and representing a very fine organization, she took the time to send a book and write a message to an intern. So she's a very neat woman, and if you don't know her, you should get to know her, because she's very, very special. And Becky has done a lot for the conservative movement, and she's done a lot, especially with environmental issues for our nation, and she's communicated with leaders all over the world. And she has been a veteran in the conservative movement for many years, and we're very proud to have her here today. She was the highest-ranking woman one of the highest-ranking women in the Reagan administration, and she served there in a number of senior policy and management positions. She was also the deputy assistant to President Ronald Reagan in charge of the Office of Presidential Personnel. And as we know, personnel is policy. We learned that from Becky and Morton, so that was a very important job that she had. Also, she was the Deputy Undersecretary of the Interior and Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Fish, Wildlife, and the Park. And she was the Senior Assistant to the Attorney General for Ed Meese. She wrote her book called Clearing the Air, which is a wonderful book about how, as a conservative, you can improve the environment in spite of the EPA and what they impose. So it's a very good book, I would recommend. And she did this, and it was to talk about her experience as the Secretary of Natural Resources under Governor Allen. So please welcome our speaker today, Becky Norton Dunlop.
Well, thank you, Jessica. That was delightful. I've got to switch gears here and turn a button on. There we go. We all set there. We've got great technicians here in front of us. Well, again, thank you very much for inviting me. Morton, it's always a thrill and an honor to be at the Leadership Institute. And to be associated with you. Jessica talked about my being a veteran of the conservative movement. I must say I'm also a veteran of the Leadership Institute. I have what is now considered an historic document, one of the first little sets of books that a Leadership Institute student would have received going through the training program. And I'm sure one of these days I'm going to find out that the bids for this on eBay are getting to the point where I can set myself up for a very nice retirement by offering my copy up. But it is a delight to be here, and anytime Morton calls on George and Becky Dunlop, he and Helen know that they can count on us, because wherever they're leading us in the right direction. Let me also say my husband is here. Many of you know George, and usually he would be seated at the table beside me, but this morning he's going to have to head off to his work shortly, and so he decided to slip into a seat in the rear of the room. But anyhow, he's my life's partner and best friend, and we're in this battle together. So I just wanted those of you who know him to know that he's here, and those of you who don't know him, I'm sorry you're not going to get to meet him, because he'll be gone by the time we break up. But he is a great warrior also in this battle. Well, let me take a few minutes this morning to talk about Heritage. I know that many of you are familiar with Heritage, some of the issues that we're working on, and some of the battles that we're going to be facing in the fall on the legislative front here in Washington, and how you might be better equipped to help educate. Of course, that's what we 501c3 organizations do. We educate members of Congress and key leaders on Capitol Hill about issues so that they're prepared intellectually to make the right decision, and then we hope that they understand that good policy is good politics. If we are successful in that, then we'll all have a merrier Christmas, and if we are not, then we'll be looking forward to the next Congress. Well, the Heritage Foundation, again, as most of you know, I'm sure, is an independent educational foundation. We're a research institute. We're a think tank. And Heritage is coming on 30 years of age and is one of the older conservative organizations in the country and increasingly effective. Now, Morton talked to you a little bit about how $12,000 could help put another organizer for the Leadership Institute on the road. One of the frustrating things about working for Heritage and being associated with the Leadership Institute is looking to see how much money the left has to work with. You know, Heritage is a big organization. We have a $30 million a year budget. And yet, on the left, you will find that a single organization organized on environmental issues will have a $100 million budget. So there are still a lot of people who have benefited from liberty and the free enterprise system who have not yet found their way into making an investment in the organizations that help make sure that we continue to have these kinds of free institutions in our country. In any event, Heritage is successful, and we do want to grow and continue to grow because we believe that the work we do is very important, contributing to the knowledge base on Capitol Hill to help make the right policy decisions for our nation and for human liberty. I'm honored to be the Vice President of External Relations because what that means is when I get up in the morning, my job for the day is to figure out how to advance conservative ideas everywhere. And as George, my husband, often says, I have the best job in the country. It's just a great privilege to have that responsibility. And one of the great things about Heritage is that we want to be partners with everyone with whom we're in agreement. And toward that end, we have a great coalitions team that reports to me. We produce a publication I hope you picked up called The Insider, where we highlight research material from any conservative right-of-center organization that we know about. Because we want to make sure that people across the world know not just about what Heritage is doing, but what conservative organizations are doing in terms of good research. So please do pick a copy of that up and take it with you today and make sure you're on the list to get it. If you're in a leadership position or you contact your members of Congress with any degree of frequency, you will find excellent resources there to make your case and persuade others to join us in the positions that we take. We also have on our one of our websites is called townhall.com. And if you don't regularly go to townhall.com, let me encourage you to do so, because not only can you access the Heritage website, heritage.org, from townhall.com, but there are over 100 conservative organizations that are members of Town Hall. And by going to Town Hall, you can connect directly to those organizations. This includes the Leadership Institute, and avail yourself of just a lot of information that will be helpful to you and the people you run into every day who need to know the conservative position on a variety of issues. I say that to communicate to you that Heritage not only does research on policy issues, but we are heavily engaged in marketing conservative ideas. We think marketing is half the battle. In major corporations around the world today, you talk to the executives about how they organize their companies, and about 30% usually is research for new product. And 30% is, running the organization and making sure things are produced on time and correctly and meet all those government regulations. But another third is focused on marketing. And it doesn't matter how good your product is, if you can't figure out how to get other people to buy it, you're not going to have a successful company. Well, the same holds true with conservative ideas. We can have the best ideas, and we believe we do have the best ideas in the world about how to solve problems that society faces, but if we can't figure out how to get them translated into public policy, then all's for naught. So marketing is a big deal at the Heritage Foundation, and we like to work in strategic partnerships. That's one of my bywords in my area of external relations, is strategic partnerships. Let's come alongside with people like the Leadership Institute all across the country and indeed now internationally, and co-sponsor conferences, co-host events at the Heritage Auditoriums, co-sponsor luncheons, work together with people who are with us and want to advance our ideas and our principles. Well, what are some of the hot topics that Congress is working on today that you need to be involved in, that Heritage has been active with? Well, the first one I wanted to mention to you this morning is the whole Medicare issue. I don't want to go into a lot of detail because it would keep us here through lunch. But let me just say that the Republican Senate has been a disaster on this issue. And fortunately, the Republican House has not been quite so disastrous, but they're wrong-headed in large measure on this issue also. This is a program that promises, if it would hit the president's desk in its current form, or at least the form the Senate passed it in, would be the biggest increase in entitlements for the out years that we have ever seen in our country. It is a disaster in the making, not only, I believe, for the generations that are represented here in this room today, but for the youngest of you in this room, it will be a burden on you that knows no end. And so we must, as conservatives, encourage the Congress when it returns in the fall to rewrite this bill in conference and make it a bill that responds to the need of the neediest, but does not eliminate choice for Americans, does not take the private sector and put it on the shelf, encourages real competition, not government-arranged competition, and has some spending limits in the bill that will limit the exposure for future generations to an incredible bill. One of the interesting elements that we find as we look at these issues is Congress, and tragically a Republican Congress with conservative leadership. Congress has a health system for federal employees, including themselves, that offers real choice. George, my husband, now works for the Department of the Army as a Bush appointee. And every fall he gets a nice little book. It's personally addressed to him. He opens it up, and there he has a book that has health plans, a variety of health plans, different providers, not just Blue Cross, not just Aetna, but a variety. He can read all the pages, the description of what they offer, and then he gets to decide as an individual what health plan he wants to purchase for the next year. But in this Medicare reform bill, we advocated this exact kind of option for the American people. And the Congress exempted itself from the new legislation they're writing, keeping their current system of choice, but not permitting such a system for all Americans. And tragically, Tom Davis from this area is one of the leaders of that. So I would strongly encourage you to go on the Heritage website, look at some of the papers that we've written on this. Bob Moffett is just a brilliant spokesman on this. He's done excellent work. Stuart Butler has written a paper laying out what the principles of reform should be that will give you excellent talking points for a letter or a conversation. And get in touch with your members of Congress and the members of the Senate. There still is time to fix this. President Bush is a nice fellow. And he is a conservative. He is a conservative, and he has a Republican Senate and a Republican House. Now, I don't think I would have advised him to say, whatever you send me, I'll sign. I don't think that was particularly a useful statement to make. On the other hand, if you were the president of the United States, who was a conservative Republican, and the Republicans were in charge of the Senate, conservative Republicans, and conservative Republicans were in charge of the House, could you not responsibly presume that if you said, send me something and I'll sign it, that they would send you something that you could sign? I mean, I think that the president should not have made the statement that he made, send me anything. But on the other hand, let's keep in mind that the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in the Senate are the ones who are going to make this bill happen. And if they had half of the skills in the Senate that a Jesse Helms brought to the Senate when he sat there and exercised the power that they have in the House, my feeling is that President Bush could comfortably say, send me a bill and I'll sign it, because he could have confidence that he was actually going to get a bill that advanced the principles that he has articulated himself for what he wants in Medicare reform. So that is a big issue. And if you have not spoken or written, please do so, because even if your member of the House or member of the Senate is right on this, hearing from someone like you with some well-articulated principles will give them courage, and we know that every politician needs courage, a dose of it every now and then, and it will give them an argument at least to say, I have constituents I've heard from, I'm sticking with the principled position on this. Another hot issue that we're dealing with, of course, is Iraq. And whatever your position might have been on whether or not to go into Iraq, we're there. We have a military presence there, and we need to support our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Heritage has done quite a bit of writing on this, talking about things like what should we be looking for from a realistic standpoint in Iraq? What should our principled position be? Is there anything good happening there? As I was looking at some of the papers that we have released on this, I came across the column that Hella Dale, who is formerly editorial page writer, editor of the Washington Times and now at Heritage, a piece that she wrote called What You Didn't Hear in the Media. And she talks about some of the things that are happening there in Iraq that are good and positive things. And of course you hear none of that in the media. So again, this is Heritage is a source of not only good policy and research, but we have some excellent editorial writers who are writing columns and op-ed pieces based on some of the real solid information that they're gathering from places other than the Washington Post. And we all know that the Washington Post is best for having on the floor for if your puppy needs to look after itself during the day while you're at work. So I really want to encourage you to go and look at what Hella has written on this. Jim Phillips, who's one of the premier experts on terrorism in the world today, tracks all of these issues very carefully. He knew about Al-Qaeda before Al-Qaeda was making the headlines here in the United States. Another piece that we have written about, which I think is very important and useful for those of us who are strong conservatives, is a web memo. Would it be a mistake to let the United Nations play the lead role in reconstructing Iraq? Now, you might think that's a rhetorical question, and to us it may be, but there are actually those out there who would argue that we should let the UN in. Our position is it would be a mistake, but then we go on to give some extensive details about why this is the case. And every day in our lives, in our work, in our neighborhoods, in some of our social circles, we come across well-meaning people who have this big tent idea on almost everything. And we need to be prepared to explain to them from a principled standpoint why big tents aren't always safe tents. And this piece that has been done by Niall Gardner and David Rivkin makes some excellent, useful points for you on why we should not let the United Nations play the lead role in reconstructing Iraq. Now, other hot issues, Liberia, of course, once again, back in the headlines, North Korea. We have done a number of excellent pieces on both of these hotspots in the world. I'm happy to say that our position on Liberia has been that we should not be sending large numbers of military forces in there. And we produced this paper right as Bush was trying to decide whether or not he was going to send another shipload of soldiers. The good news is he didn't. He sent a few in to protect the embassy, and now he is trying to get more African countries involved in sending their own soldiers to Liberia to deal with this regional conflict. And we know and we understand and we need to make the point that the United States, because it's a superpower, has a certain role to play in the world, but we have to bring other countries and other world leaders to the position where they take responsibility for some of these dictators in their own parts of the world, and that is what needs to be done with respect to Liberia. And I think we do have, at this point, some African leaders who are willing to step forward. Unfortunately, they haven't a lot of experience in taking leadership in their part of the world, but we need to help them and encourage them instead of just rushing headlong into sending all the U.S. soldiers there that will become targets. With respect to North Korea, I think, again, what the Bush administration is now doing is a very wise and we think follows some of the advice that the Heritage Foundation has put out there, and that is make North Korea talk to and work with other countries in the area to whom they're their most immediate threat, including China. And help encourage and cause these other countries, Japan, South Korea, China, to start stepping into a responsible leadership role in their region of the world. And some of our research papers make very good arguments why this is important, why we must always be ready, and why we need to have things like a missile defense in place when there are countries like North Korea out there, but why we need to also encourage other countries in the world who we have diplomatic relations with to be at the table talking to some of these rogue nations so the entire burden doesn't fall on the United States. Briefly, let me mention budget and taxes, always a hot topic in this town. I mean, it's just incredible how the budget has grown in the last 3 years. It's in many respects depressing. If we get the economy going again, I suppose these big budget numbers won't be quite as depressing, but when you have a percentage of the GNP growing, that's in government spending, that's not good. And Heritage is very active on working budget issues. We are not the lead organization for waste, fraud, and abuse. Other organizations work on this full time, but we have an econometric model at Heritage that does something we think is very important, and that is employs dynamic scoring. Now, the government today uses what is known as static scoring. When I say the government, I mean in general the government uses static scoring. And what that means is they plug the numbers for a bill into their computers, and then they run those computers as though the tax policy won't affect anyone's behavior. So what comes out the other end in terms of the impact of these bills is we'll put the piece of legislation in, the tax policy in, and then we will run it and see what the results over the next 5 or 10 years will be, as though it will have no impact on human behavior. Now, how realistic is that? We argue, and our economists argue, that dynamic scoring is really realistic scoring. If you cut someone's taxes, will their behavior change? We believe it will. And so the dynamic model that Heritage employs makes this a demonstrated situation. If we plug in the numbers for the Bush tax cuts, if we plug in the numbers for a piece of legislation like this Medicare reform bill, what will be the result on the economy in a dynamic situation? And we have been successful in persuading some government entities to begin to use a dynamic model. This is something, though, that I think would be helpful for you to be very familiar with, because it makes a huge difference in how budget cuts are scored. And when the liberals score a budget cut, what they talk about is how it increases the deficit. When we score a budget cut at Heritage, we talk about how it changes human behavior and will increase economic activity. And those are the big differences in our points of view. Another issue that we've written about is Social Security reform. Now, again, there are other organizations in town with whom we work collaboratively who work on Social Security reform. But I did want to make the point to you this morning that we have done a lot of work on this, and even though it's not a front burner issue right now, we think it's very important for all of us who care about Social Security reform to actually be up to speed and knowledgeable about this as we move into the fall and into next year. We have done a very short paper. It's called an executive memorandum, 6 important rules for real Social Security reform. This is exactly the kind of one-pager that you can get a member of Congress to read. Remember that flawed education system we have? Well, they can get through this. You all should get a copy of this, pull it off the web, 2 pages. You will then be able to, again, talk to your congressman and your senator, talk to those other organizations that are within your circle of influence. Make sure that we have, as we go into next year, an educated group of leaders among our circle of influence. This is going to be, we think, a huge issue next year, and you know how liberals demagogue this issue. They can certainly make the case for why people ought to buy their own home owner's insurance, and why people ought to be able to buy their own automobile insurance. Why can't they come a little bit farther and realize that people ought to be able to buy their own retirement insurance? Well, they're not there yet, but we certainly are, and I'm confident that you are also. Finally, I don't want to, I could go on forever. That's the great thing about being a conservative leader. We got so much to talk about. There are lots of other issues that we've written on. Again, I want to encourage you to go to our website. We do have an index of economic freedom that we publish each year. If any of you do work with companies overseas, or you have friends and colleagues in other countries in the world, this is a fabulous tool, because we use 10 core principles to measure economic freedom around the world. And every country who wants to increase the human freedom their citizens have to look at these 10 areas and say, are we doing all that we should do to protect these freedoms? It's just a very, very fine document. And finally, let me say that Heritage continues to be active in a systematic way on national defense. The conservative movement as a whole, and Heritage itself, are gratified that this president bought into the Ronald Reagan idea that we needed a missile defense, that it would be a good idea to defend the country from incoming missiles from rogue nations, or in those days, communist nations. We're glad that President Bush agrees with that. We're glad that he has put that in place, that it's moving forward. But there are still funding issues, and there's still how it will be rolled out in the future. It still is an important issue. There are other issues of defense reform that we need to be knowledgeable about. Heritage has done some writing on this. What are the key areas? Secretary Rumsfeld is over there thinking about defense transformation. These are things that are very important to the future of our country. After all, the Constitution says that the federal government has a limited role. And while that's gotten far expanded beyond what we believe is proper, we all are in agreement that part of that limited role is the defense of the nation. And so we need to be mindful that that is something that the federal government needs to do, and we need to be knowledgeable about this and encourage our elected representatives. Well, let me wrap up on that note and just simply say that we still have several months left in this Congress. The members of the House and the Senate have presumably gone home to listen to their constituents. You all have friends, neighbors, and constituents out across the country, and they need to be in communication with these members while they're at home. Because we want these folks to come back to Washington in the fall, since they're going to come back anyway. But we want them to come back educated and informed and energized to come back and take the few weeks that they have left before they leave for the year to fix some of these bills and to limit spending and to look at other ways to reduce the government's interference in our lives. And from the Heritage Foundation standpoint, we believe all those arguments are out there. They're on our side. They're the winning arguments. Heritage wants to make them available to you and to these members of Congress from people of influence like you. So I invite you to get those papers, and we look forward to just being helpful to you and supportive of you in whatever way we can do so to keep our country on the path toward greater human liberty and limited government. So thank you all very much for your time, and thank you what you do for freedom today. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. All right. Any questions for Becky? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I agree with everything you said about the Medicare and prescription drug plan and the bills being a big problem. But I have a procedural question about that. You said they should be, I think you said something about being rewritten in conference. And in the past, it seems to me we have criticized liberals when they've taken bills that have been passed in both houses and we worked hard to get provisions in, and they've rewritten them to look different than what come out of either house. Would we be consistent with this kind of position, or am I off base?
Well, I think we're being consistent in terms of what our goal is here. Now, would the best solution be not to pass a Medicare reform bill this year and to come back next year and tackle this entirely from a, yes. And if we can figure out how to do that, the answer is we should. We have made the case that the Congress should take time to do a better job of examining the costs that they're talking about in these proposals that they have on the table, the unintended consequences, the limits that they're placing on citizens that they're not willing to place on their own good opportunities. So that would be the ideal thing, for them to come back and say, well, yes, we've looked at all of this, we've looked at the conference, we're too far apart, let's come back next year and begin all over again. That would be the ideal thing. If you can't do that, though, you have to take the best elements that are in the House bill, I think, and try to build on those. And there is a good argument. This is the same argument we make on judicial restraint versus judicial activism. And I suppose the best way to say that is sometimes you need a little judicial activism to get back to the point where you can afford to have judicial restraint. Yes?
Well, speaking of judicial activism, what is the Heritage Foundation strategy on the president's judicial nominations like Miguel Estrada and the like that seem to be filibustered to death by Chuck Schumer and the rest of them?
Well, I think this is one of the great tragedies that we've seen in this Congress. Heritage has privately advised the leaders in the Senate, as well as at the White House, that we believe that they should have a real filibuster. Actually, this would solve that Medicare problem, I might add. If you engaged, if you followed the Senate rules and you had a real filibuster, what you would have is the Senate working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, requiring that these flaming liberal obstructionists stand on the Senate floor and say outrageous things, and just keep it up for as long as they had breath. That is what they should do. What?
Like Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Mr. Smith. Again, what we really need now in the United States Senate is someone who knows the rules of the Senate like Jesse Helms did. Boy, do we miss him in the Senate. In any event, that really is what we have advised. We will be doing some programs at Heritage this fall. I've said the one thing I want to do is I want to get big posters, like rock star size posters, of Priscilla Owen and Miguel Estrada and Carolyn Cool. I mean, these are minorities and women, let alone outstanding jurists. You've got Hillary Clinton standing in the way of minorities and women getting on the benches. Little hypocrisy there. So we're looking at some various strategies. Of course, these judicial nominees are in a terrible position because they're wonderful people, very articulate, and yet while they're in this process, they really can't make speeches and go out and engage in activities that would advance their own interests. But it's a battle that needs to be fought. Yes, sir. You'll be next.
You mentioned choice in Medicare, and I know about the choice thing, and it seems like everybody I've ever known who went through the HMO Hillary type, medical plan always went back to the big carrier because it's a disgrace the way the HMO system is and the way it runs and the way it's being run. So isn't that one of the things also that needs to be, approached is this, it's people's health. You go to an HMO and it's almost like being in a third world nation.
Well, I don't think there's any question but that our system of healthcare is broken. And one of the things that Heritage has advocated is scrapping the system of government regulating how many pills you can take and what time of day you can take them and what can the doctor give you and what can't the doctor give you. And going to a system where every person owns their own health care plan. And I think if people were able to own their own health care plan and decide what doctor they wanted to go to, and I would say this would include alternative medicine and preventative care if I had anything to say about it, then we would have more opportunities for people to choose and have more freedom in their medical decisions. And I must say more responsibility for their own health care. But the HMOs are just really a symptom of a broken system. And all of this is because the government has gotten more and more involved. What we have now is we defeated the Clinton health care plan, and now we have a creeping Clinton health care plan. And, not many more months, we're going to have the whole enchilada, and it's going to be like, putting the lobster in the pot, or the frog, I guess it is. You put the frog into warm water, and the frog just sits there and gets stewed, whereas if you dropped him into the hot water, he would jump right out. So we're in the stewing process, and that's not a good thing. Yes?
Last question.
So still on Medicare, you made a lot of reference to principles, but didn't mention many principles. I wonder if one principle would be that benefits would be limited to those who need it. Is
Well,
that a
yes.
conservative principle or not?
Well, I would say this, of course, in the we do have a paper on Medicare reform principles, but the issue about need is important because the way this whole reform got started is because there are some people in need. And this Medicare reform bill that they've written reforms everything and kind of lumps everyone together instead of focusing on a piece of legislation that deals with those in need.
We can call that a conservative principle.
We can call that a conservative principle. If you're going to deal with a problem in the country, you should deal with the explicit problem that you have, and that's not what we're doing with this bill for sure. We're lumping everyone together in a big general mess. Well, thank you again very much. It's been a pleasure to be here, and we appreciate all your support for the conservative movement.
Thanks. Whoop, where's it? Right here. Thanks a lot, Becky. You can see with her command of the public policy process how valuable she is to Heritage Foundation and how valuable Becky is to the country. Becky, as a little token of our appreciation, I want to present to you the Leadership Institute's Adam Smith scarf.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is fabulous.
Now, for those who are not aware of all the history of George and Becky Dunlop, one important aspect of it is that during the Reagan administration, when Becky was an assistant secretary of the Interior Department, she was in charge of all the national parks. At that very time, George was assistant secretary at the Agriculture Department, and he was in charge of all the national forests. You talk about a power couple. Between the two of them, they controlled much of the land area of the United States. Literally true. And I do want to tell a little funny personal story. As many of you know, Helen's and my cabin in the mountains of the Briar Patch burned down in January of 2000, and we spent much of that year getting the place rebuilt, and it fell on me to go out and get all the furniture. Helen said, you go get it, and I'll trust your judgment on it. And I decided early on that we would refurnish the thing, and I mean everything was gone. I mean the only thing that was saved were some cast iron skillets. An aluminum skillet had melted there. But so I went out to country estate auctions and garage sales, but found that a good and reliable and always turning over source of used furniture and things were the thrift shops and the Salvation Army. And so I got a very old used Chevrolet Suburban, and I would tool around and get these things. And we had a list of everything that we had lost that Helen and the two boys and I had written out, so I just checked things off as I got them. But we got to the point where I realized that we needed to have new flatware, knives, forks, and spoons, because the others had been destroyed. And I asked Helen to come with me over to the Salvation Army, a big Salvation Army south of here, because they had two big vats, I guess, where donated knives, forks, and spoons were just dumped in mass there for anybody to take out at 25 cents a piece, a knife, a fork, or a spoon. And I said, Helen, you might as well come with me and just dig out flatware that you like. And I think she really wasn't too keen on going with me to the Salvation Army. Maybe to give a donation, but to be a customer there, I don't know. She was reluctant, and I finally talked her into doing that. And so we walked in to do that, and I kind of saw Helen looking around like this as we were walking in, and I thought, well, maybe she's thinking, who's seeing me going into the Salvation Army. But before long, she got right into it, and she had handfuls of spoons and forks and was digging there, and I was standing beside her, letting her do all the picking, and suddenly I look up, and there, right beside us, holding their beautiful little puppy dog, were George and Becky Dunlop. And they said, "Oh, Helen, look who's here." And of course, nobody could be embarrassed about that, because guess who was shopping economically also at Salvation Army? George and Becky Dunlop.
The ultimate in recycling.
The ultimate in recycling. That's great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join us on Wednesday, September 3rd. Our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast speaker will be Major General John K. Jack Singlaub, USA retired. Jack is one of the most interesting, most effective heroes that the 20th century produced. All the way from parachuting repeatedly into occupied France to decades and decades of other magnificent activity and patriotic activity. And last Friday night, Helen and I had dinner at the Singlaub's house with the two of them, and they're good friends of ours. Joan Singlaub works with Helen a lot in the Daughters of the American Revolution, and Helen's a good recruiter, but Joan is even better. Joan is recruiting some of the interns that we currently have at the at the Institute to join DAR. But Jack Singlaub, a great hero, who was, of course, savagely treated by liberal Democrats, but what else is new? Any of you who would like a tour of the Leadership Institute should come up here and join Danielle Walker. Danielle is right here. Okay, great. Danielle Walker is actually a Cajun from South Louisiana. She is an intern in our development department, and she will give those interested in the tour. So if any of you are interested, see Danielle. All right, thank you all very much.